On March 4th, 2020, BTS released the official music video for the song Black Swan, one of the singles off of their album Map of the Soul 7. The unannounced video, featuring the members alternately clad in white or black as they dance among the lights and the shadows, was meant to be a surprise for ARMY, joining live performances of the song and a haunting art video featuring a Slovenian dance group. It's easy to watch the Black Swan video and be mesmerized by the elegant choreography, the opulent setting, or the striking aesthetic that perfectly fits the tone and theme of the song. But there is so much more going on in the Black Swan video and in the song itself than meets the eye. So today, I want to analyze Black Swan's themes, motifs, and message, exploring everything from the concept of shadow to what it means to be a black swan. Come, do your thang with me now, and together we'll dive into the world of BTS's Black Swan. Welcome back to the ARMY Theorist Corner, a channel dedicated to BTS's music, lyrics, and artistry. If you're new here, I hope you'll join me as I analyze everything from music video themes to the meaning behind the lyrics of BTS's songs from all eras, as well as share some of my personal interpretations of what certain elements might mean. Today, I'd like to explore one of my favorite BTS songs ever, which was once described as a dark song about what lies deep within. A dancer dies twice, once when they stop dancing, and this first death is more painful. This quote by the famed American dancer Martha Graham can be found in the opening scene of the Black Swan art film, a creative interpretation of the song that inspired it. And the sentiment of this quote echoes through every part of the song's lyrics, videos, and even choreography. In Korean press releases, the theme of this dark and stirring track was even described as follows. Black Swan is created with dancer Martha Graham's quote as a motif. Like a dancer faces their first death when they stop dancing, the track contains the fear of the moment where BTS are no longer able to perform on stage as an artist. Through Black Swan, the members of BTS express that, as they continue to do music more and more, they will face their first death as well if the music fails to touch their hearts or make them excited. But every time such a moment happens, I hear another voice of mine from deep inside, I face the Black Swan in me, and ironically, I come to a realization that music is the only thing I have. Through the mature, self-reflecting lyrics, BTS conveys their confession as an artist who learned what music means to the self. Death and rebirth, pain and perseverance, reflection and acceptance, shadow and light. These themes are very present throughout Map of the Soul 7, and indeed a great deal of BTS's discography, and Black Swan is built on them. With that in mind, what does the song tell us about these themes and about the band as a whole? What can we as fans take away from it? And what is a black swan? Where did Black Swan come from? A rare bird in the lands and very much like a black swan. Latin phrase. Up until the late 1600s, it was generally assumed that black swans didn't exist. Because every swan that had ever been observed had white feathers, it was assumed that every swan in existence was a white swan. As such, black swans were a popular metaphor denoting something impossibly rare, something non-existent. However, when European explorers arrived in Western Australia, they found swans with those supposedly impossible black feathers, and suddenly the notion of a black swan changed. No more was a black swan an impossibility, and no more did calling something a black swan mean it was unlikely to exist. Now, to call something a black swan meant it was something thought to be impossible that could someday become possible. Today, the notion of the black swan theory refers to an event that has a surprise major effect, and, although seen as a shock when it happens, is often described after the fact as probably having been inevitable all along, much like it was inevitable that people would eventually discover real black swans. Fittingly, Black Swan theory is all about how fragile systems of thought are, and seeks to explain biases people use to blind themselves to the impact of rare events. Real black swans are the best example of this, because the entire underpinning of the black swan equals impossible phrase is so fragile that it wilts the minute a single black swan is discovered, as it did when these supposed rare birds were found in Australia. Just like the belief that all swans had white feathers was a fragile and easily broken one, many systems of thought are just as fragile. We'll come back to this in a minute. Turning specifically to BTS, in his 2020 V-Live discussing Map of the Soul 7, RM spoke a bit about how the song Black Swan came into being. Besides the notion of Black Swan theory, or the real-life bird itself, RM describes drawing inspiration from the film of the same name, and of course, the black swan in the ballet Swan Lake, which the film centers on. In the ballet, the character of Odette is a beautiful maiden who has been transformed into a white swan by an evil sorcerer, whose curse can only be broken by love. To thwart any chance Odette has to be rescued from her curse, the sorcerer transforms his daughter Odile to appear like Odette, and she is portrayed as the Black Swan. This comes back around in the 2010 psychological thriller Black Swan, in which a young ballerina struggling to portray the dual role of the white and the black swan finds herself slowly losing her grip on reality as she attempts to reconcile these two extremes. Although all of these instances of black swans seem very different, there are a few common themes they all share, such as the nature of being fragile, as well as the theme of what's possible versus impossible. The black swan as an idea and a concept is powerful, but also has the tendency to easily break established systems of thought. In the creative sense, that can be necessary, but also dangerous, as it forces us to break our own established systems and often break down our walls in the process. If a white swan is a beautiful, fragile thing, the black swan is the shadowy form of that. And so, if art is a beautiful thing full of passion and meaning, there will also be a blacker shadow that comes when the art is formed and will be an inevitable part of the process. It is from this theme that the song Black Swan seems to be born. In the press conference for Map of the Soul 7, the boys discussed the song as a confession of fear from an artist relating to the notion of the shadow. Obviously, the shadow is a huge theme in this album because of its role in Jungian psychology. We'll dig deeper into this in a future video covering Jung's concept in more depth, aided in large part by the book Map of the Soul 7, Persona, Shadow, and Ego in the World of BTS by Jungian scholar Maurice Stein. For now, though, a quick overview of the shadow tells us very clearly how Black Swan relates to this theme. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is considered the buried, unconscious parts of our psyche, full of things we don't want people to see. As Stein describes in his book, if the persona is the positive, acceptable face we show the world, then the shadow is the darker, unacknowledged, and opposite side of that. With that description of the shadow in mind, listen to the Spotify description for the song. The song lends voice to the band's darkest fears. The music they do will one day cease to touch or move them. Yet every time they come face to face with this black swan within themselves, they hear voices calling out from deep within their hearts and are stricken with the realization that music is all they have. This track is a confession of an artist who has truly learned what music means to himself. If a black swan is an anomaly, an unpredicted dire event, as Stein says in his analysis, the black swan for creative people might be the moment when they feel themselves dying their first death, as Martha Graham describes. I believe there are many reasons why this first death may occur, or why our shadow, the dark parts of ourselves we long to hide, may try to convince us this is occurring. Perhaps it's anxiety or depression. Perhaps it's creative burnout. Perhaps it's imposter syndrome, the persistent feeling that you don't deserve your success and eventually people will decide you're a fraud. All of these can become our own personal black swan, or even make us a black swan. But can we survive that? Can we embrace it as part of ourselves? I believe this song shows us that we can, and that its music videos portray this message. Black Swan has two music videos, the official music video and the earlier art film. The art film stars the MN Dance Company, a Slovenian dance troupe, who dances an intense interpretation of the themes of the song that heavily influenced BTS's own choreography, all set to a sweeping orchestral arrangement of the song. It's here I would like to start, discussing how the dance troupe's creative interpretation of Black Swan's lyrics and themes can help us understand these same themes in the later video starring BTS themselves. The art film. In my opinion, the art film is raw, visceral, almost a bit unsettling, and absolutely beautiful. The video opens with the aforementioned quote from Martha Graham about the 2 deaths of a dancer, which is even more appropriate here as we join the dance troupe. As the 7 dancers enter, we can see very clearly that 6 of them are clad in black, while 1, the main dancer, is not. In fact, rather than wearing white, this dancer's torso is completely bare, so it seems we are meant to concentrate on this dancer in particular. Not only does this help us see the visceral movements of his body, and serves to illustrate movements such as when the other dancers use their hands to represent wings, but I also believe it adds an extra layer of rawness and vulnerability to his portrayal. I interpret the dance as being a representation of shadows and light, and we see that very clearly in this dancer's battle against the dancers dressed in black. I believe those black-clad dancers represent the shadow, the black wind mentioned in the song On, if you will, or even the dark wings of a black swan. The main dancer, who likely is meant to represent the white swan or the concept of an artist, spends most of the dance struggling against them. Indeed, Black Swan is a song about struggle, whether that struggle is against your art or your shadows slowly wearing you down. During the first lines of the song, I feel the dance really reflects being dragged down by losing your passion and interprets what that first death must feel like. The swan dancer is tormented by the shadow ones, being forcibly held by them, almost to the point of being attacked at times. This eventually leads to a scene where the dancers are surrounded by what Jimin describes as a laser prison during BTS's reaction video to the film. This laser prison appears during the song's refrain and really encapsulates the lines about struggling against the deep ocean. I also find it telling that when the laser prison eventually fades after the struggle, it's on the line, "I saw myself" in J-Hope's part. Throughout this scene and the film in general, light and shadow both alternately seem like a prison and yet a necessity. It seems necessary to acknowledge that one can't exist without the other, which is a heavy theme not just in Black Swan, but in Map of the Soul 7 in general. Something else I find interesting is that the swan dancer doesn't only seem attacked or imprisoned by the black-clad dancers, but rather there are times where he actually seems to be able to escape or even control them. Of course, these moments in the dance correspond to similar moments in the song. For instance, the main dancer faces the black-clad ones head-on when Suga says the same line, "I saw myself," in his own part. I don't think it's a coincidence that the main dancer seems to be able to control the shadow during this lyric about seeing and acknowledging your own self and the shadow deep inside. The same type of thing likewise happens a few lines later when Jin sings "Nothing Can Devour Me," and the main dancer is able not only to push the shadow dancers back, but is actually able to evade them. He spreads his wings and ventures forth, but the shadowy dancers eventually find him again and their battle resumes. From struggle, to control, to escape, and back again, the dance seems to both begin and end with struggle, as the song does too. But even more so, it seems to end with acceptance or perhaps inevitability. Interestingly enough, during BTS's review of the film, RM believes the main dancer being held aloft represents the black-clad dancers/black swans restraining him, preventing him from flying. But are they? Is he attempting to fly towards freedom while they hold him back? Or has embracing his shadows lifted him higher than fighting them ever could? Perhaps the answer is both. Black Swan has always struck me as being a song about cycles. Cycles of creative doubt and fear, followed by a rally, followed by knowing that there may be a day when that rally never comes. The fact that the dancer is not dragged down but held up in this scene is interesting, because it seems to match the theme of being raised up, which is a line in Intra Persona. In that song, being raised up seems to be something that happens when thinking about one's own self and asking questions about who you really are. It may be a stretch to say that's what's happening in this scene, but the parallels are nevertheless something to consider. In general, there do seem to be a lot of instances in which these similar themes come back up in this film. During the boys' review, RM makes a comment during the scene in the laser prison about, quote, subliminating our own pain. Unless I'm mistaken, the act of sublimation is a defense mechanism, where that which is socially unacceptable is changed to something more acceptable. So, in the case of subliminating pain, this may refer to the notion of making pain into art, which is true of the song and seems to be visually portrayed in the art film. To me, this also reminds me of the "do your thang" lyric in the song in general. I've always thought of this line as an invitation for us to think about the things that make our heart beat, as RM requests in his 2018 Speak Yourself speech at the United Nations. Black Swan is about the fear of losing that which makes our hearts beat, yet also seems to be driven by the ultimate challenge to push on and keep doing these things despite the fear. In the art film, all these "do your thang" moments are expressed with movement and struggle in extremely beautiful and thrilling ways that I think get to the notion of this thought. Even so, it all seems to end with the notion that perhaps this swan needs to embrace the shadow in order to fly. The official music video. Meanwhile, the official music video follows many of the same themes we see introduced in the art film. For instance, we can immediately see the white and black swan themes in the members' outfits. Black-clad BTS, representing the shadow, are often shown in well-lit locations, whereas white-clad BTS, representing the light, are usually shown in dark ones, until the end when they seem to become one with the shadow. In general, the notion of shadow and light, themes that were also introduced in the art film, become very clear in this video, with shadows often being portrayed as larger than life and with a will of their own. The many instances of light and shadow throughout the video seem like a reference to the notion of all light having a shadow, and the shadow being longest or deepest when the light is brightest. This can also be found, of course, in the lyrics to Interlude Shadow, in which Suga tells us, "My shadow grows in the blasting stark light." I plan on doing a future video about the theme of shadow, but for now, looking just at the Map of the Soul era songs, where else do we see shadow appear? On has mentions of the shadow, of course, but I also can't help but think thematically of Louder Than Bombs, which was described as being a song about the inner shadow during the Map of the Soul 7 press conference, and which contains the haunting line about the unfamiliar shadow in the midst of those cheers. For a direct image where the shadow appears because of light, we can also look to RM's Interpersona, in which he specifically mentions the shadow appearing under the spotlight. This is relevant to Black Swan for a number of reasons, and is relevant to the music video specifically because it takes place in a theater. In general, there are many songs on Map of the Soul 7 that discuss the notion of looking and being seen. From Filter to Respect to Moon, being viewed and judged is a huge theme throughout the album. But perhaps no song embodies the phenomenon better than Black Swan, both through its lyrics and what we see portrayed in the music video. Once again, I want to highlight the description of the song from the press releases. In Black Swan, BTS steps into the deep inner side of the self and faces the shadow it has been hiding as an artist. It is the confession of BTS as an artist who grew up to a global superstar. Because of this and other descriptions, we know that this song and video are about what it feels like to have creative doubt looming, especially when you're someone extremely famous and visible. As such, it's very effective to have the video take place in a theater. Not only do we see BTS dancing on a stage during many scenes, but there's even a room full of mirrors, further highlighting these themes of seeing and being seen. The video was filmed in the Los Angeles Theater in California, a movie palace constructed in the 1930s, which, although a beautiful historic landmark, nevertheless closed its doors to the public in 1994. Because of that, it serves as a perfect example of something that is beautiful and yet ultimately runs on borrowed time, much like Martha Graham's quote conveys the same sentiment about dance. These emotions are expressed in BTS's own unique way about their own art, in which they feel concern that the emotions that lead to their music are fleeting and on the decline. I think this easily relates to the life of the beautiful but stagnant theater, and so it makes sense to have the struggle of the Black Swan play out on a stage where the bright lights create all sorts of shadows. These shadows especially come out when the lyrics express fear of creative death, like, for instance, in Suga's part and RM's part. In the latter half of the song, however, things shift in a way that's almost easy to miss, to represent the shadow and its struggle as something ultimately like self-reflection. In J-Hope's verse, the shadow is there, but there seems to be more control, and both his lyrics and his choreography reflect that. I find it interesting that this lyrical pivot is shown to coincide with the scene where Jimin sprouts wings. The notion of wings and flying has been a big theme in BTS's work for a long time, as in the 2016 album Wings, which takes this concept to new heights, no pun intended. Throughout that album, the concept of growing wings is expressed as something liberating but also somewhat painful and scary, despite the fact that it's necessary. Here again, sprouting wings is portrayed as a painful process, but seems to be essential. This idea makes sense when you consider what the shadow represents throughout the album and in the map of the soul as a concept. The shadow, although a frightening hidden part of ourselves, is an important part of a person's development. Suga himself, when describing Interlude Shadow, mentions that it takes courage to accept the shadow, but that it's vital. Whether it's embracing the shadow, allowing our wings to sprout, or acknowledging creative fears, Black Swan represents these themes visually as well as lyrically. Remember that earlier description from the press releases about how every time this fear rises, BTS must accept the Black Swan and remember what their music means to them? Even in the photo shoot for Map of the Soul 7, the boys discussed this concept, stating that their photos were meant to convey a desire to become black swans, as well as, quote, the insecurity and anxiety that comes along with it. Admittedly, this reminds me a bit of Louder Than Bombs again, with the line, "We picked this game." Because music is all they have, as the Spotify description says, they must learn to accept that pain and doubt are a part of the creative process. By accepting the black swan within themselves, they can assert that nothing will devour them and that they will continue working to overcome their looming creative first death. Black Swan really is a dark and emotional song, but its beautiful honesty is part of what makes it so special. It forces us to ask the question of what our own shadows are and how we can accept them. The music video ends with this question. In the final scene of the video, we see one of the looming shadows fade, and Jungkook, who is watching it as it shrinks, eventually gets up and walks away. What does this final scene represent? Is it a depiction of facing down the shadow, sending it back into our subconscious? Or does it represent integrating our shadow into ourselves, the way the Map of the Soul concept urges us to do? Much like the ending of the art film could be left up to interpretation, I think this scene could be too. As I said earlier, creativity and creative struggle are cycles. There will always be periods of doubt, fear, and uncertainty, followed by periods of joy, beauty, and creation. And so too, there will always be periods where our shadows threaten to overwhelm us. But if we can become aware of them, we have a chance to face and even accept our inner shadows in a way that will help us spread our wings and become the swans we were always meant to. Black Swan is a song that can aid us in that journey, as well as an honest, vulnerable, and spectacular view into BTS's own creative struggle and emotional process with that struggle. For that reason, it will always be one of my favorite BTS songs, both as a creative person myself and as an ARMY, and it will always be a song I use and cherish whenever I do my own thing. There is so much to discuss with Black Swan that I can promise you this won't be my only video related to the song, so if you enjoyed this, please look forward to more discussion about Black Swan and all of Map of the Soul 7 coming up in the near future. For now though, what are your own thoughts about the music videos and their themes? What does the song mean to you? And what are your own thoughts about the endings of both videos? I look forward to hearing all your thoughts and theories as we continue our ARMY theorist journey together. Until next time.